This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. So, I've made videos about maybe why you might not need a jazz guitar before. The number one reason is there's probably not as much money playing jazz guitar as you might think. So for me personally, I've probably spent more on jazz guitars than I've earned playing jazz. I think roughly that's probably right. But I wanted to kind of do a video just talking about the jazz guitars that I've tried throughout when I wanted to kind of get more into jazz. So this starts for me around the age of sort of 16, 17. I'd heard John Petrucci talk about Pat Metheny and Aldi Meola and players like that, and I kind of started listening to them. And Pat Metheny was kind of my favourite kind of the early jazz things that I listened to. George Benson as well. So early on, the first thing I did was I had a Music Man Sub 1 guitar, and I decided to buy some Roto Sound top tape strings and put them on that, and that actually kept me interested for a little while before I sold that guitar. But I'll come back to this as a principle, because actually I think that is probably quite a sensible strategy. The first jazz guitar that I bought was the Ibanez PM35. I think they still make something similar, Ibanez, and Ibanez as a kind of serious entry-level jazz box, I think, is a good bet. The Ibanez PM35, my dad also bought one because he liked it enough. Not necessarily a versatile guitar, but that is the thing with most jazz guitars, right? And so the PM35, just a neck pickup. Later on, I would come to decide that guitar is actually quite bright, all maple, essentially, and the pickup, I think it's Super 58, also a little bit on the bright side. And the thing that I've found is if a jazz pickup is quite bright, what you will necessarily probably do is roll off the tone. And I've found actually that that can lead you to roll off too much top end, and then you just end up with quite a muddy thing. There is an album with Jim Hall and Pat Metheny which is quite muddy sounding. Someone might be able to point you in the direction of that in the comments, but I think it's not. I know rolling tone all the way off is an option, but I think sonically it can lead down some not so optimal paths. I think the next thing that I tried was an Epiphone ES175 Premium. Now they made these, and I got one from Germany somewhere, and these had like a weird kind of nitro finish, like a satin nitro finish that did check. But I think the main thing for me about this guitar, it did have a mahogany neck, but quite a slim neck, and like this maple body. So pretty much like an ES175 in construction, just a skinnier neck than I think you would get on an ES175. But it did have actual Gibson 57 pickups in it. And when I then played the Pat Metheny, I could tell, or I felt like there was a significant difference in that I was getting a richer tone, less bright, more mids from the ES175. So I did then sell the Ibanez PM35. Also, I got an Ibanez Art Core, like their Relic. I used this with round wound strings on it. This was like a ES339 type. I had an Epiphone ES339. That, yeah, could be used for jazz as well. Quite a versatile guitar, like an ES335, but smaller. But yeah, the Ibanez Relic one, I sold that in the end because I felt like something about the neck shape didn't suit my hands, and I was feeling sort of, you know, when it doesn't feel quite right on your hand, you can start to get some sort of pains in your hand when you're playing a guitar, and obviously that's not a good sign, so I sold that one. I think that would have had similar pickups to the PM35, smaller bodied, and again, they make that sort of guitar, and that could work for jazz really nicely too. I got an older Ibanez AF something. I think this would have been a Korean-made guitar. So Korea, the Peerless factory, make a lot of really cool jazz guitars, actually. I sold this one on, I think, because it had a rattle, as well as not necessarily competing with the Epiphone in my eyes. Peerless, talking of, I did have a Peerless Gigmaster for a while, not a long while, but yeah, really high-quality guitar. I think I would be looking at Peerless if I was looking for a mid-priced jazz guitar that is really respectably made. So Peerless Gigmaster might be a recommendation if you're looking for one. The Epiphone ES175 Premium I wouldn't say was quite as good quality as the Peerless, although maybe the electronics in there sounded a bit more classic jazz because of the Gibson 57 pickup in there. Then I got a Hutchins was the brand name, but it was actually a rebranded Hofner. Made these guitars for many years, I think like since the 40s, 50s, 60s. The new President is kind of one of their higher end models. I think this was essentially like an all solid, pretty much a solid spruce top, pretty nicely made guitar. It had like a staple pickup in it. This was way too resonant to be actually of any use though. It's like a really thick body, like thicker than an ES175, more resonant than an ES175, quite a chunky neck, and I got rid of that because I tried to use it once live and it just fed back way too much to be of any use whatsoever. What else have I tried? I think that's it. I considered an Epiphone Joe Pass. I think those are really, the Emperor, quite a decent entry-level jazz guitar as well. Or say entry-level, you know, beyond entry-level, but like at that kind of level where it's between 500 and 1,000. You can get them for quite a good price, or you certainly used to be able to. That might be another good option. So Peerless, Epiphone, Ibanez, I think are some of the good options. Let other folks know in the comments if you've got some other recommendations. What I've settled on is the Gibson ES165 Herb Ellis. So this is obviously essentially a 175, but without that pickup that you'll never use included, unless you're Bryan Adams. And this for me is like one of the kind of warmer, plummier. And I use this with the tone all the way up, which is not something I used to do on my older guitars. I just think it has like quite a rich. Quite a rich sound, and as I say, like tone all the way up does the job. But the downside is that these are quite expensive now. The ES175 in general has been discontinued, and it's not rare to see those fetching like used £3,000 to £4,000, even for like not old examples. The Herb Ellis is slightly cheaper in general than the 175. And now here's the kicker: the very first guitar that I ever started on, the Ibanez Roadstar. If you've heard of Lorne Lofsky, he actually plays straight ahead jazz stuff, like really awesome stuff as well. He's got a version of, I think it's Falling, Very Early, that he did on that David Beebe pointed me out. He plays on an Ibanez Roadstar, and that was my very first electric guitar that I got. There's one in the loft. Just a straightforward kind of Strat style. So I think the point really is that you can play jazz on any guitar, really. I think an ES335 and a Telly are super acceptable things to play on, like Julian Lage, Ted Green, Tim Lurch, Ed Bicker. Loads of like great players play jazz on the Telly. ES335, obviously loads of great players play jazz on the ES335, and you have like the hollow aspect. For an actual jazz gig where you're playing with a drummer, for me personally, I found that this, which is a laminate but full hollow, fed back way too easily for me to actually get use out of this live. So an ES335, if I was playing with a drummer live, is the type of guitar that I would use if I was still playing jazz live, which I'm not so much anymore. Also, shout out to Rory Green. Some of you guys have checked him out on Instagram. Guy plays jazz on a Strat, kind of modern jazz vibes. You can play jazz on whatever guitar you've got, essentially, and things that people aren't going to turn their nose up at, Tellys, ES335s, those kind of guitars are actually useful for other stuff. I found that this ES175 or 165 is kind of really only useful for jazz, and that was also the same for all of my other kind of fully hollow guitars. I can't play with much drive through them. Even clean tones, when you start to get up to gig levels, are really troublesome. So I would say to you, just focus on like learning jazz tunes rather than getting caught in the kind of gas for a jazz box thing, which I was definitely in for a while. I remember actually looking on is it jazzguitar.be, there was a guy on there called Pierre, and like in his what's the word, avatar, or the bit underneath that, it would say time on the instrument. I think that is the real key with this jazz, is that you like need to spend time just learning lots of jazz tunes, and spending time with your instrument. That's where you feel kind of like you're actually getting somewhere, for me, whereas actually just looking through books like Hal Leonard books with an Ibanez PM35, to me didn't feel as jazzy as I could feel today just playing like Misty on a Telly or something like that. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you need a jazz guitar? Do you want a jazz guitar? What would you go for? For me, I think a Peerless Gigmaster is a really good idea. If you're insisting on having one. The Eastman makes some really good stuff as well, sort of mid-priced. A Gibson ES175 or ES165, I think, could sort of cure gas. It did for me. I don't have any other jazz instruments. This kind of knocked them all out. Yeah, and then for the entry-level stuff, Ibanez and Epiphone, as you'll probably be aware, are pretty good. D'Angelico, I think, are made in the Peerless factory. Those are quite popular, but I think part of that is down to marketing. I had a D'Angelico. I think for me, the Gibson wins for almost all of this stuff, and I got this for a very good price, £1,500. I think nowadays probably 2.5, 3 for a good Gibson jazz box is probably the least you'd be looking to pay. But you could do it on your telly, you could do it on your ES335, you could do it on your Strat. Lornowski does it on an Ibanez Roadstar, kind of a shred guitar. You can do it. Just stick some flatline strings on a guitar that you don't maybe play as much, and see if that gets you inspired to play some jazz. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm going to play some Maiden Voyage, is what I was playing in the intro. If you want that backing track, it'll be on my Patreon, along with a chord sheet. Cheers.